Is the African National Congress making a U-turn on value-added tax? We have to ask ourselves at this point, why are we actually in this value-added tax crisis? Have you asked yourself this question? Outside of the short-term politics of it, outside of the GNU game theory between ANC, DA, Action SA, all of these other actors, have you asked yourself, why is this TKZ fiasco unfolding? Remember that song? TKZ and Friends, Fiasco. Ooh, ooh, fiasco. It's a fiasco, but why is it unfolding? There's reporting in the Sunday Times that the African National Congress is trying to do a U-turn on the VAT increase. They are basically struggling to find the guaranteed votes for the next stages in the budget vote, and big business has given them a strong view that they want the Democratic Alliance to remain in the coalition. That's why we've had marathon meetings between the ANC and the DA, and Helen Zille came out very happy, very confident about their position in the GNU. They're staying in the GNU. So now the ANC is apparently telling the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana, to make a plan B. And he may have to make a plan B because he needs to find votes for the next stages of the budget process. And just to recap those quickly, step 1 of the budget process, you adopt the fiscal framework and revenue proposals. And this must happen within 16 days after the budget has been tabled to Parliament. And that's the vote that happened on the 2nd of April. And that's the part that was controversial because it included the VAT increase. Step 2, you have to process and pass the Division of Revenue Bill. And this must happen within 35 days after the adoption of the fiscal framework and revenue proposals. The scheduled date for this particular vote, the Division of Revenue Bill vote, is the 6th of May, 2025. And this is 5 days after the proposed VAT increase will have kicked in. And this 5-day period, if the VAT thing goes up, will have maximum attention on political parties to see how they vote, because the public is not happy about the VAT increase, and the VAT increase is going to make their lives more expensive. And this is what is causing the turbulence, because some of those parties are going to ask for guarantees from the ANC before making that second vote. They're going to want to get cabinet positions. They're going to want to be formally included in the government of national unity. They're not going to just give their votes to a VAT increase, which is extremely unpopular, without there being some kind of a trade-off with the ANC. So as things stand right now, it's tough. The step 3 is a processing and passing of the appropriation bill. And this must happen within 4 months of the start of the financial year, which is the 1st of April. And the day of the vote for the appropriation bill is the 10th of June, 2025. So as things stand right now, the reporting is that Enoch Godongwana has been told, hey, chief, come up with another plan. It's not working. The numbers are not numbering, so to speak. The other parties that they are speaking to don't seem to want to be part of supporting a VAT increase. And as I said, they may be looking for guarantees. And that's the update on the story of value-added tax. Will it go up? Will it not go up? That's where we stand. But I want to go deeper. I want to go deeper than that. I started off by saying we need to ask ourselves why there's a VAT crisis. We have to go beyond the politics and ask ourselves, what has led the Minister of Finance to be so adamant in pushing for any version of a value-added tax increase, knowing full well its impact on the economy and particularly on the poor and middle class? And that's what I want to talk about in this episode, to look at what's driving the drive. What is the motive behind the modus operandi and the praxis of the Minister of Finance, right? And you need to know something as we go into this episode. A big factoid that I need you to be aware of is that historically the ANC has been unwilling to take loans from the IMF and the World Bank because these IMF loans have caused major economic crises in countries like Zambia and Zimbabwe. Let me tell you the Zambian story. In the 1980s, the Zambian currency was in free fall and its economy was a hellhole. It was a disaster. Nobody wanted to touch the Zambian kwacha. It was a worthless currency, if not the most worthless in the world at that particular point. It was a disaster. How did Zambia find itself? You know, in the movies, there's that scene where something is happening, a guy is falling off a building, and then he's like, I bet you're wondering how I found myself in this situation. If you're wondering how Zambia found themselves in the situation, let me break it down for you. In the 1970s, the price of oil went up significantly due to various issues that played out in the Middle East, and the price of copper went down as the global economy slowed and people were buying less copper. Zambia is an exporter of copper, and in fact, most of their foreign currency earnings in the 70s were coming as a result of sale of copper. So the increasing price of oil, which is something that Zambia was importing, and the decreasing price of copper, which is something that Zambia was selling, led to them not being able to make their payments to the international lenders. And then Zambia fell into a debt crisis. Zambia's borrowing then increased because Zambia had to cover its economic shortfalls, and that led to an increase in their debt burden. By the middle of the 1980s, Zambia was one of the most indebted countries in the world relative to its GDP. Enter the IMF. Enter the IMF. The IMF intervened with loans to help Zambia, but imposed strict conditions, including austerity measures and privatization. And that actually further strained the economy. The IMF's conditions for lending included reducing government spending, removing subsidies, privatizing state-owned enterprises. These structural adjustments. These measures led to increased poverty, reduced government revenue, and caused a decline in public services. Does any of this sound familiar in 2025? Reducing government spending, reducing subsidies, privatizing state-owned companies. Vulindlela, valindlela, vulindlela. Weramaphosa. IMF ufuna privatizer lezi. Vulindlela, weramaphosa. Hey wena. Is it sounding familiar? By the way, for more information on how aid affected countries like Zambia and Zimbabwe negatively, we've done a book dissection on the book Dead Aid by Dambisa Moyo and Expensive Poverty by Greg Mills. And those book dissections are part of the members-only book club we launched, which is called the Book Lab. So you can join the Book Lab on the Mighty Jamie TV YouTube page. So back to our discussion. You're hearing the themes. You're hearing how it's sounding, right? So for the period between 1994 and 2018, the ANC was aware of the impacts that the IMF can have on an economy, and they had no appetite for taking money from the IMF. Zero appetite for IMF. Allergic to IMF. Which is what tenderpreneurs should be to the Hosh Karmaimas. Unfortunately, they are just gobbling each other, and it's causing all kinds of economic problems. Here's what Johan Rupert had to say to Peter du Toit in about 2018, 2019 about the IMF. And he said this on page 51 of the book Stellenbosch Mafia, this book right here. This is what he said. He said, where's the page? I'm on the wrong page. Let me go. Let me do a quick live reading for you, for the man dem. I think we'll be at the IMF in a year's time. The governing party don't know what's awaiting. We'll either have an Arab Spring type event or Ramaphosa must restructure everything, and he cannot do it. The IMF will, however, force you to restructure. And if you think about it, isn't that the best thing that could happen? Isn't that the best thing that could happen for the country? Halve the public service. Clean up state-owned enterprises. Look, the nationalists were rotten, but they didn't steal everything. These people are incompetent and they steal. That's what Rupert was saying about the ANC. The IMF will be a bloody fiasco. He also knows about TKZ fiasco. I don't know how many companies will be able to manage interest rates of 25% to 30%. But what's the alternative? That's what Rupert said. By the way, we've also done a book lab dissection on this particular book, and it's in the exclusive members-only part of the channel, which you can join now. So it should be clear from what Rupert is saying on page 51 of Stellenbosch Mafia that Rupert knows that when the IMF comes to town, they're not coming to play. They're coming to co-pilot your Ministry of Finance. They are coming to structurally adjust you. Gonna pinch you like this till you are structurally adjusted. That's what the IMF is there to do. He said it. They're not coming to play. They will force you to restructure. Think about it. Rupert has started banks. RMB, he started it. It's still a major shareholder in FNB, First Rand, all of these entities. He knows these. He knows these institutions quite well. Went and worked in America for some of the large financial institutions. He knows what he's talking about. He's right. When IMF comes, they're not coming to. And by the way, he was right that the ANC was going to go to the IMF. While the ANC historically opposed the IMF and World Bank loans, that all changed. From 1994 to 2018, no IMF loans. But it all changed under President Cyril Ramaphosa because several loans were taken from the IMF and the World Bank and also from the Just Energy Transition Partnership for, renewables. Renewables for my Smiley. Renewables for Patrice. Anyway, back to the discussion. The loans are US dollar-based loans. And you need to be aware of that because as the currency gets weaker, the interest payments go up because these loans are in a foreign currency. This is one of the reasons the ANC didn't want to touch these. They wanted to issue bonds based in rands so that if there's an issue, at least that is localized to the rand currency, you are the rand issuing state, so you can deal with those challenges with a little bit more control. But you don't control foreign exchange, and your foreign exchange reserves can fluctuate. But if you have to make international payments in Forex, that can affect you. And these loans come with structural adjustment requests. You have to show that you're reducing your debt to GDP ratio and that you're liberalizing your economy, which is code for selling off state-owned enterprises. You have to show that you are vulindlela, where Ramaphosa, IMF, ifuni privatization, vulindlela. I can't sing, guys, but I'm just adding some flavor to the episodes. So here's a timeline of the loans that you need to be aware of. In July of 2020, for the first time in post-democratic South Africa, the IMF loaned South Africa 4.3 billion US dollars, which is now worth 82 billion rand. And this was emergency support for South Africa to address the COVID-19 pandemic. That money was immediately chowed. Royal Barclay, Digital Vibes. Remember all of these scandals? Some of the people who were implicated in these scandals, Royal Barclay, for example, they are now moving like we don't remember that they were implicated in massive corruption scandals of their own. I'll be preaching at other political parties. I'm like, but we know that you are, it's the Spider-Man meme. We know you are them and they are you, and you are saying others are corrupt and you are also... Story for another day. The Royal Barclays of this world, we people act like we don't remember. I sometimes see all of these characters, Gauteng Health, etc. Guys moved over here. Now he's talking like we don't remember. He's Hosh Karimamas. We remember. Just because, you have influence in mainstream media doesn't mean that the public has forgotten. Right? So the intervention that was given by the IMF were unprecedented interventions. It was the first time that the IMF as an institution had contributed to South Africa's public finances or fiscus since the country's democratic transition. Rupert's prophecy was fulfilled. The IMF came into the house. And then there were a bunch of other loans that followed. The floodgates of loans from these institutions had been opened. January of 2022, the World Bank gave South Africa a loan of $750 million, which is now 14 billion rands for the COVID-19 pandemic relief. 2022, okay, but COVID was over. But hey, November 2023, $1.85 billion collectively taken in loans, 35 billion rands for the Just Energy Transition Program. March of 2025, you saw Ursula von der Leyen and President Ramaphosa announcing massive loans, 4.7 billion euros Over 100 billion rands now for just energy transition. Can you see all of this? So 1 year after the IMF loan was taken, Minister Enoch Godongwana came into the role of finance minister. And from day one, he was talking about how the debt is too high. Remember that guy, the rent is too damn high. Here's the debt is too damn high. But you have to ask yourself, knowing what you now know, this short economic history that you now know, you got to say, Right. This is what he said. Some of what he said in the 2021 midterm budget policy statement. Let me read it out. The 2021 medium-term budget policy statement is about navigating South Africa's path to economic and social recovery. The medium-term budget policy statement charts a course that demonstrates the government's unflinching commitment to fiscal sustainability, enabling long-term growth by narrowing the budget deficit and stabilizing debt. Then he went on. Equally important is the faster implementation of structural reforms. Buzzwords, IMF buzzwords. We spend more than we are receiving in tax revenues on a consistent basis. This, together with the composition of spending, did not meaningfully increase growth. Instead of getting higher growth from fiscal expansion, our debt continued to rise. The 4 trillion rand debt that we now owe is incurring debt service costs that will become the largest portion of spending compared to individual functions. The debt service costs are non-discretionary. In other words, we cannot avoid paying them. Their effect, therefore, is to crowd out other spending priorities. Debt service costs are expected, and you're saying this in 2021, are expected to rise from 269 billion in 2021 to 365 billion in 2024. This is higher than the health and police service budgets. And then he continues to make an argument for fiscal consolidation, which is raise taxes, reduce expenditure, make cuts, cut it. Remember the song, Cut It. That's what he was arguing for. These are IMF suggestions. This is all IMF. Remember what Rupert said? Page 51 of the book, Stellenbosch Mafia. Back to IMF. This year, the IMF actually called for South Africa to take bold steps to ease a suffocating debt burden and boost economic growth. They always say this boosts economic growth, and it doesn't actually boost economic growth. It doesn't. It does not boost the growth. We've seen from various examples that it doesn't, but they always say, cut to grow. Cut your budget, cut your diet to grow your muscles. Ask any bodybuilder. That's not how muscles grow. Anyway, this is what IMF said about South Africa this year. What we are recommending is a fiscal adjustment of 1% of gross domestic product per year for 3 years. And this was said by Tidiane Kinda, who is the IMF's representative to South Africa. And he was saying this to Bloomberg News earlier this year at an interview at their Johannesburg offices. He said steps that could be taken to achieve this would include wage discipline, accelerating reforms at struggling state-owned enterprises, and tighter control of government procurement. So 3% of GDP over 3 years, and that will put public debt on a downward trajectory. That word is trying to put debt on a downward trajectory and lower public debt to more prudent levels of 60% to 70% of GDP in the next 5 to 10 years. That's what the IMF is calling for. What I'm trying to put across to you is that this is what has been leading and has led the finance minister, Enoch Godongwana, to approach all of his budgets and medium-term policy statement speeches with the austerity and fiscal consolidation approach. He has been pushing for cuts to spending, debt repayments, and restructuring the debt-to-GDP ratio from day one. Ironically, while he's been doing that, they've been taking large loans for renewable energy, including the one announced earlier this year. More debt has been taken for renewables while arguing that the debt is too high. Think about that. And South Africa gets most of its energy now still from coal. All of this money has been going to IPPs, where Patrice Motsepe is a big player. where Johan Rupert is a big player, where even companies like Discovery are players. I didn't even know that till Adrian Go was asked the question at one of the conferences where he was speaking. So this is why Minister Enoch Godongane has been pushing for this. This is why there's an Operation Vulindlela. This is why this moment is one which is actually not just about the value-added tax increase, but about the future of state-owned enterprises, the future of civil service, and the future of South African politics. And the argument is that this will grow and boost the economy, but Zimbabwe and Zambia offer opposite examples from different decades. Zambia was the 80s, Zimbabwe was the 90s. And I don't want to negate the seriousness of corruption, poor leadership, the money that is being chowed by the Hoshkari Maimas and the Hoshkari fathers, these tenderpreneurs who are giving money to these, yellow bones with yellow thighs in the Santon nightclubs. I don't want to underplay that. That's a significant problem. I just want to show you that on the other side of that problem, there's this structural adjustment policy push, which doesn't solve the corruption problems, but ends up leading to major problems within civil society, within the economy of the countries. Here's some food for thought. As the IMF is pushing for this, as the minister is pushing for this, and they may not necessarily go through with it, we'll have to see. Because in as much as Sunday Times is reporting that there's a U-turn, other people were saying that no, they're going to continue. And this is the 13th of April. 1st of May, banks, everybody's ready to charge the increased VAT. We'll have to see what plays out. But I want to give you some food for thought. In the 1980s, Zimbabwe was a relatively successful nation economically. And it was growing slowly, slow growth, but it was growing. In the 90s, the IMF imposed structural adjustment programs, ESAP, Economic Structural Adjustment Programs, what it was called. And this happened about the same time that there were two major droughts. This Economic Structural Adjustment Program of privatization, liberalization, all of that happened at the same time that there were two droughts. And these things, they exacerbated each other's impacts in society. The results of the droughts and the structural readjustment programs was that the Zimbabwean economy started to worsen significantly compared to where it was in the 1980s. And this led to an unintended consequence that caused a lot of the economic and social problems we're seeing in SADC today, outside of Mugabe's dictatorship, which I don't want to downplay. And talking about this side of the equation, I don't want you to think for a second that I am defending the dictator, the killer, the genocidal Robert Mugabe. I don't want you to think that for a second. But two things can be true at the same time. And we have to hold sometimes more than one truth in order to better understand problems. So the result of the droughts and the structural readjustment programs was that the Zimbabwean economy started to worsen significantly compared to where it was in the 80s. And this caused an unintended political consequence, one which the IMF was not planning for. The British were not planning for, nobody. The worsening economic conditions in Zimbabwe caused an increase in political extremism within the ZANU-PF, and this is what precipitated the farm invasions. This is what precipitated them, because as people were suffering from the economic hardships, the agitation within the ZANU-PF continued. And then the war veterans were like, no, we're taking that land. And they took it, and Mugabe had to rubber stamp that. He agreed with their politics, but he wasn't necessarily intending to do it that way. But it ended up being done that way because this was an unintended consequence. You want another example? If you're not convinced, maybe you're not there yet. Let me give you another example, more recent example, 2021. In 2021, the IMF initiated a program in Kenya, a structural program, so to speak. This was a comprehensive economic reform package which was designed to support Kenya's economic recovery post-COVID-19 and to reduce its debt vulnerabilities. It was an extended fund facility, an EFF, not Economic Freedom Fighters, extended fund facility, and an extended credit facility, ECF. By the way, I had a conversation with a young Kenyan last year when the protests were happening. So you can go watch that on the channel and get more insight on what was happening and what drove the youth of Kenya to push for what they push for. So I had conversations with people on the ground about this. The program was initially valued at 2.34 billion US dollars, and later it was extended to 3.6 billion US dollars, including a resilience and sustainability facility. I mean, they just call these things facilities of $541 million, right? Started at 2.3 billion, went to 3.6 billion, and added facility, right? So they added to the extended fund facility and the extended credit facility. Then they put a resilience and sustainability facility. So many facilities. It's debt. It's debt with strings attached. Key components of the program included the following two things. Number one, fiscal consolidation. The program emphasized raising revenues and controlling expenditures to reduce fiscal debts. Raising revenues means increasing taxes, reducing subsidies, reducing your civil service. Reforms. The program supported broader reforms, including strengthening governance, always good, addressing weaknesses in the state-owned enterprises, and enhancing anti-corruption efforts. Right? What happened? What happened after this program was introduced? There were protests in Kenya in 2024. The protests were triggered by a proposed finance bill that aimed to increase taxes across various sectors, including trade, personal income, agriculture, health, investment, housing, and more. The finance bill of 2024 was backed by the IMF because it aligned with the IMF's requirements for fiscal consolidation. So instead of leading to stability and continuity, the IMF structural readjustment program actually almost collapsed the government of William Ruto in one of the largest youth protests Kenya has ever seen, Africa has ever seen. Still reeling from the effects of that up to now. Point being, these structural adjustment programs, when they're introduced, the idea is just reduce your debt, normalize, keep things in the center, reduce your public service. But as you're reducing your public service, you're firing people. Those people are unemployed at home. As you're cutting expenditure, people are now being affected in different departments, because you're cutting over here, cutting education, you're cutting health. The economy is getting worse. It's not growing. You're paying these debt payments, but your economy is not growing. And then as this low growth continues, what could happen? Your currency begins to devalue. And all of that work becomes negated anyway, because now those debts, which are in euros and US dollars, become more expensive. Happened in Zambia, happened in Zimbabwe, right? We're seeing that it even happened in Kenya. And in many other places, there's a lot of research you can do on structural adjustment programs by the IMF and why they failed. And then China came in and just said, take money. Just take from us. We'll give you money. No conditions attached, except for the conditions that we're attaching in Chinese. T's and C's apply, but read Mandarin. Anyway, besides going into that China side of the conversation, the point I'm trying to make is the idea was it's all going to be cool, it's all going to be stable. But as the economic conditions worsened on the ground, the politics actually became more extreme. People went to further sides of the political spectrum. They didn't go to the center, they went to the extremes. And as you can see, it radicalizes populations. It leads to more economic instability, caused problems in Kenya, caused problems in Zimbabwe, caused the kind of economic conditions that we are seeing in SADC as a result of the collapse of Zimbabwe. And many countries now are facing that same debt problem. And now you have got entities like BlackRock who are trying to come in and buy infrastructure because those countries cannot pay their debts. So this time, aside of restructuring the debts, you've got BlackRock and that other company that they merged it with, which I can't remember right now, coming in saying, we want to buy infrastructure in Africa. We want to own this for our shareholders, the private equity company shareholders, so that they can make profits from the infrastructure of developing and least developed nations. Just think about the ethics of all of that. In future, the roads in Africa will be owned by BlackRock, not for the benefit of the civilians of those countries who will be paying massive, massive tolls. It will be for the benefit of shareholders in BlackRock. This is why public goods should not be privately owned. It can lead to adverse inequalities and exploitations and massive extractions as those entities basically become a global mafia, taking from you and taking from your people. This is where we are. I just want you to think about it at a level deeper than the conversation we've been having. Think about it at a level deeper than what we've been talking about in terms of the political Game of Thrones. Let's look bigger. Let's look at IMF. Let's look at the other factors in this conversation. What do you think? Let's have a conversation in the comments. I'll meet you there. I'm coming there.